Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to get geopolitical. Today, we're diving headfirst into Asia.
Always a hot topic.
It is, and especially this year because things are changing fast.
They really are. We're seeing a realignment of power.
Exactly. And luckily, we have a brand new report to help us make sense of it all.
The 2024 Asia Power Index.
Straight from the Lowy Institute. You know them?
They always bring the insights.
They do. So this report, it's basically a power ranking of all the major players in Asia.
But it's much more nuanced than just who's got the biggest army, right?
Right. It's not just about military might.
It's about influence. Who's shaping the region and how.
Okay, so explain that.
The index looks at a whole range of factors. Military strength, yes, but also economic clout, diplomatic networks, and even cultural influence.
So it's measuring the ability to make things happen, to get others on board with your agenda.
Exactly. And this year's index, well, it's showing us that the game is changing.
In what way?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is that China's power, it's not surging ahead like many predicted.
Really? I thought China was supposed to be unstoppable.
That's been the narrative, but the index suggests it's more complicated than that.
Interesting. So what's the reality?
China's power seems to be plateauing.
Plateauing.
It's still growing, but not as rapidly as before. They're facing some headwinds.
Like what?
Well, their economy is a big one. It's still growing, yes, but not at the breakneck speed we saw a few years ago.
And that impacts everything else?
It does. Economic growth fuels so much. Military expansion, technological development, diplomatic clout. When the economy slows, those other areas feel the pinch.
So even though China has the world's second largest economy, it's not translating into rapidly expanding influence anymore.
Precisely. And other countries in the region are starting to notice. They're hedging their bets, looking to diversify their partnerships.
That's really interesting. We'll have to unpack that dynamic a bit later.
Definitely.
But for now, let's talk about the U.S. The index says they're still top dog in Asia.
I know.
Ominous. But their lead is shrinking. Should we be worried?
It's a trend worth watching for sure. The U.S. has been the dominant force in Asia for decades.
Since World War II, really.
Right. But the index shows that their advantage, it's eroding, particularly in areas like military capability and economic relationships.
And I'm guessing China's growing influence plays a role in that.
Absolutely. China has been steadily modernizing its military, pouring resources into defense.
And their economic influence is undeniable.
Exactly. They've become the top trading partner for many Asian countries.
So is the U.S. spreading itself too thin? Trying to be everywhere at once?
That's the question a lot of analysts are asking. They're facing challenges on multiple fronts, both globally and domestically.
A classic case of strategic overstretch.
It's a real concern.
Yeah.
And it's creating opportunities for other players to step into the void.
Players like who?
Well, India is one to watch. The index highlights their power gap.
Power gap. Okay, I have to ask, what is that?
It's basically a measure of untapped potential.
Go on.
India has all the ingredients to be a major power. Huge population, booming economy, strategic location.
They've got the resources, the manpower, the geographic advantage.
Everything. But their actual influence, it hasn't quite caught up to that potential yet.
So what's holding them back?
A few things, actually. Domestically, they have their share of challenges. Infrastructure, poverty, internal political divisions.
The usual suspects for a country of that size and complexity.
Pretty much. And on the international stage, they need to strengthen their diplomatic and economic ties, especially with their neighbors.
Build those bridges, those partnerships.
Exactly. It's all about leverage in this game. And speaking of leverage, the index had some interesting things to say about Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia, they're definitely a region on the rise.
Tell me about it. They're becoming a real hub of economic and strategic activity.
The report actually called Indonesia the region's fastest growing power. That's impressive.
It really is. They're firing on all cylinders right now. Strong economic growth.
Which always translates to clout.
Always. And they're playing their diplomatic cards right, too. Building relationships, engaging in international forums.
Punching above their weight, you could say.
Without a doubt. And they're not the only ones making waves in Southeast Asia. The Philippines is stepping up, too.
In what way?
They're getting more assertive, particularly when it comes to those maritime disputes with China.
The South China Sea. Always a geopolitical hotbed.
You said it. And they're strengthening their alliance with the U.S.
Smart move. Having a powerful friend never hurts.
Never. It's all about finding those strategic advantages in this new world order.
And speaking of strategic, or maybe not so strategic, the index was not kind to Russia.
Ouch. Yeah, they did not have a good year.
To put it mildly, their score plummeted. That war in Ukraine is taking a toll.
A massive toll. It's drained their resources, damaged their international reputation.
And isolated them diplomatically.
Big time. The index shows just how much the war has hurt their standing in Asia.
A cautionary tale, perhaps.
About the costs of aggression.
Yeah.
Definitely. And a reminder that power is not a one-way street.
It can be gained and lost. And speaking of gains, we've talked about China, India, even Indonesia. But what about us? Australia is holding strong in the top 5.
We're punching above our weight, as usual.
How do we do it? We're a relatively small country, population-wise.
It's about strategy. We leverage our resources effectively.
And our alliances. Those are key.
Absolutely. We've got strong partnerships with the U.S., Japan, even India.
The power of friendship.
Don't underestimate it. It's about more than just military cooperation, too. It's about economic ties, shared values.
A united front.
In a world that's increasingly fractured, those alliances are more important than ever.
So it's a balancing act, really. Maintaining our traditional partnerships while also adapting to the new realities of the Asian century.
Exactly. And the index shows that we're doing a pretty good job of it.
Not too shabby for a country of our size. But what does all of this mean for the average person? Should we be worried about this shifting balance of power?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think the key takeaway here is that the world is becoming increasingly multipolar.
Meaning?
The days of one or two superpowers calling all the shots are over.
It's a more level playing field.
In a way, yes, but it's also a more complex and unpredictable world. More room for miscalculation, for rivalries to flare up.
And for cooperation.
Of course. But the stakes are higher. And that's why understanding these power dynamics is so crucial.
It's not just about following the headlines anymore.
It's about connecting the dots, understanding the motivations and anxieties of the key players.
It's about anticipating the moves on that global chessboard.
Precisely. Because those moves have real-world consequences for all of us.
So what do we do? How do we make sense of it all?
That's a question each of us has to grapple with. The world is changing, and we can either be swept along by the currents, or we can try to understand the forces shaping our future.
Become more aware, more engaged, maybe even a little more proactive.
I like the way you think. Knowledge is power, after all. And the more we understand about these global shifts,
the better equipped we'll be to navigate whatever comes next.
Exactly. It's about being informed, being prepared, and maybe even being a little bit bold.
Boldly going where no podcast has gone before.
Now you're talking my language. But in all seriousness, these are issues that affect us all.
They do. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Asia Power Index, where do we go from here? What's the next chapter in this evolving story of power and influence? So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Asia Power Index, where do we go from here? What's the next chapter in this evolving story of power and influence?
The million-dollar question, crystal ball time. I think if we've learned anything from the index, it's that predicting the future is a fool's game.
Too many variables.
Way too many. But we can look at the trends, right? And what we're seeing is, well, it's not just about China rising or the U.S. declining.
It's more nuanced than that.
Way more. This isn't your grandfather's Cold War with two superpowers locking horns.
It's more like a multiplayer chess match.
Now you're getting it. Multiple players, each with their own agendas, their own strengths and weaknesses.
And their own anxieties. Let's not forget those.
Absolutely. In a way, that's what makes this whole thing so volatile. More players mean more potential for miscalculation, for misunderstandings to spiral.
And for unexpected alliances to emerge.
Exactly. Think about it. A decade ago, who would have predicted the level of cooperation between Russia and China?
Not me. And who knows what the next 10 years will bring.
Exactly. The old playbook, it's out the window.
So what's the new playbook? How should we be thinking about the future, especially with all this uncertainty?
Honestly, I don't think there is a playbook anymore. And that's both exciting and terrifying, right?
It's definitely liberating in a way.
It is. We get to write the rules of this new world order, or at least try to influence them.
But it also means we can't rely on old assumptions.
Exactly. We have to be adaptable, open to new possibilities, but also aware of the risks.
So a healthy dose of realism, mixed with a dash of optimism.
That's a pretty good recipe for navigating the 21st century, I'd say.
It's certainly working for us so far. But on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We've only scratched the surface.
That's what we like to hear. But seriously, folks, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of Asian geopolitics.
A real eye-opener.
It has been. And a huge thank you to you for guiding us through this complex landscape. Your insights are always invaluable.
My pleasure. As always, it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Couldn't agree more. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, the future of power in Asia, it's not a spectator sport.
We're all players, whether we realize it or not.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and who knows, maybe you'll be one calling the shot someday.
Now that's an idea.
It is. But until then, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.